Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Mike Lennon, Security Week. On behalf of Security Week, I want to welcome you guys to a session today that is a very hot topic, and that is the topic of supply chain, software supply chain, cybersecurity. Specifically going to dive into actionable SBOM management. Really thrilled to have two great speakers here today from Microsoft and Finite State. Just a couple things before we get into it. This will be recorded. You'll get a link to watch it on demand afterwards. If you want to kind of go through it and share with colleagues, you'll be able to do that. You'll get a link about 30 minutes after the recording, after this session completes. Additionally, the reason we do these live is to keep them interactive. So you'll notice a Q&A box inside the On24 interface. Submit your questions as you like. We're going to try and get to some of them during the conversation, and some may wait to the end, but go ahead and submit, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. With that said, I don't want to take up too much time. One more thing, you'll actually see some resources inside the interface as well. You can download those and have a look at some materials that are a little bit more technical more in depth than we'll probably get into today. But I'm going to hand it over to Tom Bain over at Finite State to take things from here. Tom, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate it, and appreciate everybody being here today with us for our presentation and our discussion. What we're going to be covering really today is, I think everybody who's logged into this webinar today probably knows that there's a fair amount of risk associated with leveraging of open source in their organizations. And what we're really looking at today in terms of to drive this discussion is really around what teams need in terms of generating, sharing, managing SBOMs, and being able to do that at scale. So what we'll do is we'll walk through some of the trends that we're seeing, both on the Microsoft side and the Finite State side, talk through some new strategies and new approaches for how you can actually take specific frameworks, take specific pieces of frameworks and other regulations that are out there to be able to put together something that's customized for your organization, all to address this scale problem with managing SBOMs and to reduce software supply chain risk within your organization. So I'm first going to just introduce our presenters. We're really lucky today to have Adrian Diglio. Adrian runs software supply chain security for Microsoft. As you can imagine, his job entails lots of SBOMs, lots of software, lots of documentation of software and SBOMs and all that kind of stuff. And he's going to talk through a little bit about the things that he's seeing today, but also how they're addressing this both at Microsoft and through a framework that Adrian has built. And they've given that over to, I believe it's OSS, I forget the organization, OSS.
OpenSSF.
OpenSSF, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And our second presenter today from Finite State is our head of research and analysis, Larry Pesci. Larry comes from a technical background. He spent a lot of his career pen testing, hacking, coding, doing a whole bunch of stuff. He does a lot of research on our side, on the Finite State side. We're really happy that we've got really two very different perspectives to walk through this topic today. So without further ado, I'm going to just advance the slides here, turn it over to you, Adrian, and let's just make sure that the slide advance. Yep, so we've covered the agenda already. Really, we're going to be talking about our methodology and some new approaches to scale SBOM management. So I will turn it over to you, Adrian.
Thanks, Tom. So I'm Adrian Diglio. I lead the secure software supply chain team at Microsoft. And, as we've already mentioned, we're going to be talking about a couple things today and how they intersect together. There are some risks with using open source, and there's also been recent initiatives to drive software transparency by generating SBOMs and sharing those SBOMs, which would reveal what open source is consumed inside of applications. And thereby allowing consumers of software to have insight into their supply chain risk. And so first, I wanted to just kind of talk big picture about like how big is this problem, because open source is prevalent, right? 91% of code bases include open source components that had no new development in the past 2 years. So an increase of 88%. So we're talking about 91% of software out there is using open source, which is tremendous, right? It's almost becoming critical infrastructure to the software industry. So many people have dependency on consuming open source for, speed of development and innovation. However, on the next slide, we're seeing that there's been a rise and increase in attacks specifically targeting open source. So this is from Sonatype's State of the Software Supply Chain report. They've measured that there's been a 742% average growth in attacks targeting open source year over year, with over 88,000 malicious packages discovered last year. So we've got open source massively in use across the software industry, and now attackers are shifting left, and they are targeting developers because they know that developers are pulling down these packages, and if they unintentionally pull down a malicious package, it could compromise their development environment, could compromise their build infrastructure, and if it made its way out into production, it could compromise consumers as well, consumers of their software. And Microsoft is no exception. We are a large consumer of open source. We have over 83,000 unique open source packages that is used more than 11 million times across all of our source code. So this has been a problem that my team in particular has been paying attention to. And I'm going to be talking to you today about for any software producers out there that you probably also have to be producing a software bill of materials, but there's also a framework, a specification of requirements that you can use to aid you in protecting against open source supply chain threats. But with working on tackling generating SBOMs at scale, there's certain challenges that we've come across as an industry. I've been participating in a number of different industry working groups on this topic. I lead Microsoft's SBOM program inside the company, and I've been collaborating with a lot of my peers across the industry, and being able to produce SBOMs at scale and being able to share those SBOMs at scale has a number of different nuances to it. So we've got hundreds or thousands of teams building software today at Microsoft. I believe we have an average of 500,000 builds a day. It's a mounting problem because SBOMs are best generated at build time, but then there's the external pressures of how fast can we share our SBOM with our customers that are demanding it, and there's new regulations coming out from the U.S. Presidential Executive Order 14028 and the most recent FDA for new medical devices are also requiring SBOMs to register new medical devices. So there's going to be this increasing demand for SBOMs, and our ability to share them at scale is going to have to rise to meet that demand.
Yeah, Adrian, if I may, some definite things on some of those external pressures. In that, yeah, the SBOMs as part of the CI/CD pipeline and part of our secure DevOps should be very dynamic every time we have a build, and providing those to those that want it in a timely fashion. Most organizations we're finding aren't ready to deal with that just yet.
Completely agree. And with the, the advent of SBOMs, kind of one of the main scenarios of SBOM management is allowing consumers of software to see the vulnerabilities of the open source that's listed within the SBOM. And that kind of leads us to this community approach of well, wait a minute, sometimes vulnerabilities are not always applicable. Sometimes developers consume an open source component and only use one specific function or library rather than the whole component. And so the emergence of VEX, vulnerability exploitability exchange, as a way to allow software producers to communicate to their customers that even though this package is included in our software and it says it has a vulnerability, it may not be applicable or exploitable within the way that we have implemented that piece of software. So VEX is almost like a way to kind of reduce the noise and allow people to focus on the vulnerabilities and the risk that are actually real. And VEX is even newer than SBOMs today, and so the industry has been spending a lot of time ramping up on SBOM management, but then there comes like this whole other piece to it of being able to accurately describe any vulnerabilities that customers might see inside those SBOMs. And to just reinforce this message, for a while now, the industry's been very focused on producing SBOMs, but there's that whole consumption piece, which is the other side of the coin, and the industry now needs to focus on better SBOM management practices and scaling up how to find and collect and store and manage these SBOMs when they receive them from their suppliers or their vendors. And so there's this current gap that I hope that we can all work to close. And as a software producer, it's very important that when we share the SBOMs that represent our software, that we want the open source that's listed within it to be healthy and hygienic, up to date. And so what I'd like to describe for a minute is focusing on the SBOM producers. I wanted to tell you about some practices on ways that you can make sure that your SBOM looks healthy to the customers that you share them with. Next slide.
Yeah, Adrian, I'm compelled to make a joke about the combination to my luggage on that last slide for some reason.
Yes. Oh, great Spaceballs reference. So Microsoft published and contributed the Secure Supply Chain Consumption Framework, or S2C2F. S2C2 sounds like a mouthful, but it kind of also sounds like R2D2. So I kind of like the acronym a little bit. This is a specification that is hyper-focused on how to protect developers from OSS supply chain threats, including vulnerabilities and also preventing them from accidental consumption of a malicious package. We've been implementing this internally here at Microsoft since 2019. We published this in 2022 and contributed it to the OpenSSF, which is it's a Linux foundation, open source security foundation, and where I continue to lead and maintain this framework with some of my colleagues and others from the OpenSSF in our biweekly SIG meetings. Next. The scope of the S2C2F is it's essentially a set of requirements. And we've organized these requirements into a maturity model, levels 1 through 4. And it's all about how to securely consume open source into the developer's workflows. So I'm talking about language packages, things like NuGet, NPM, Maven, PyPy, Rust crates. Those are things that developers consume onto their desktop and consume into their builds in their CI/CD pipelines. And so because this framework is very hyper-focused on this one problem set that affects all of us, as I previously described in the beginning of this talk, this framework pairs very well with other producer-focused frameworks that are focused on how to secure the supply chain for software that you develop, right? So frameworks that organizations such as NIST has published, or the NSA Enduring Security Framework. The OpenSSF also has SALSA, supply chain levels of security assurance. The Center for Internet Security also has a software supply chain security framework as well. So this is a framework that can pair with any of these other ones and be used in partnership together in parallel. And so why does this matter to you? That's something that any organization can adopt to help mitigate against those OSS supply chain threats. And so I want to show you on this slide how this fits in the bigger picture. So we've got source, build, and release across the top. That's essentially representing the producer flow. If you could click once. And then you have the dependencies, which represent all the tools and external open source that are consumed by developers while they are producing software. If you could click again. And then lastly, connected to source, build, and integrity, if that's representative of your DevOps platform, there are lots of devices and identities and service accounts that have access to your DevOps platform, your CI/CD pipelines. And so this is kind of how we're modeling the space. And at Microsoft, to address the top row, click again. We've got lots of animations on this slide. Microsoft has published the SDL. We published this back in 2006, and it's been evolving over the years to accommodate new security requirements and evolve as technology evolves. As software development changes, as technology goes from on-prem to the cloud, the SDL requirements have been evolving over this time, and their most recent evolution has been to accommodate software supply chain security requirements. But on that dependencies row, Microsoft uses the S2C2F to secure ourselves against vulnerabilities and OSS that might have malicious intent. And then next, we follow zero trust principles. I understand that zero trust is not only about identities, but a lot of the principles in there about principle of least privilege and like just-in-time elevation of privileges for admin level accounts. Those are the types of things that we are doing to protect our CI/CD environments from compromise. Because as I had mentioned earlier, attackers are shifting left. We have to be shifting our security left as well. And then fundamentally under the bottom of this, if you could click once more, we have to make sure that all of our CI/CD pipelines and the DevOps platform are securely configured, that we have a security monitoring team that's dedicated towards looking at and detecting anomalous events inside that platform, that they're sending those events to incident response teams for triage, and that we have a long-standing business continuity and disaster recovery plan. So that's how the S2C2F fits in this picture. And S2C2F is hyper-focused on dependencies, but it's also going to help us with the maturity level 2 requirements, which I'll get to soon, help us produce healthy-looking SBOMs. But first, a high-level introduction of the S2C2F. It's organized into 8 practices, starting with ingest, and these are the high-level practice areas that we categorize requirements into, and each of these leverage a threat-based risk reduction approach toward secure consumption. And on the next slide, I'm gonna show you the threats that we actually analyzed. We looked at real-world threats, things that have actually happened, and understood and did a post-mortem analysis of technically how did that attack work, and then figured out what the mitigating requirements should be to protect ourselves from that type of a threat. So you can see the S2C2F framework requirements on the right that mitigate against these very specific real-world examples that have happened on the left. I'm going to just zoom in a little bit on this salt stack example on the very top. I think this happened back in 2021. Salt stack published a new CVE at the same time that they made a patch, but adversaries are so fast that they're able to research that CVE, develop an exploit, and then go discover systems in the wild that are still using the unpatched version, and were actively exploiting systems in the wild within 3 days after announcement of the CVE. Now, the patch was available, but organizations often have a struggle with patching the speed at which they can update and patch their environments. And so it's almost like organizations the world over should have a North Star of being able to patch open source within 3 days, right? So that we can operate faster than the adversary. And so that's what maturity level 2 is all about. On the next slide.
Oh, Adrian, I wonder if I may, one of those other threats that we're looking at was some of the typo squatting ones. And from some of my recent experience, we've seen a lot of that typo squatting around NPM and PyPy, and has been one of those ones that still happened. There's a couple of researchers that have observed 451 typo squatted packages in PyPy serving malware. And one of the most recent ones was one that had packages published to PyPy August 23rd. August 16th was the last one. As part of their setup.py installer, including malware into the actual code that you're going to be importing into your Python projects. So it's out there, it's real, and we needed to be better about it. I think about that one from the developer's perspective. They install those libraries, they put the stuff into their code, and maybe they don't run that setup.py to install new libraries for weeks, months, or hopefully not years.
Yes, and typo squatting has been a long-standing issue. It's been however, it's remained effective. It's simply a malicious actor uploads a malicious package that has that the name of the package is spelled just slightly differently than a well-known established package. So developers can accidentally confuse them and download the wrong one and be downloading the malicious one. It's a very easy yet somehow still effective way of tricking people into clicking on the wrong thing. And so here's an overview look about the S2C2F requirements. In the past, the industry's rule of thumb for managing open source has been inventory it, scan it for known vulnerabilities, and update and have an incident response plan. I made that level 1 because that should be the bare minimum today. So level 2 has a theme that's very focused on improving your mean time to remediation, or MTTR, improving the speed at which you patch. There are tools and technologies that are out there today that can help take the burden off of developers, right? So things such as auto OSS updates, like Dependabot on GitHub. It just submits a pull request to the developer and says, you have this OSS package that has this vulnerability, and here's a PR to update to the latest version. And all they have to do is approve the PR. I understand that doesn't work in every single case, but that does reduce the toil and it improves the speed at which we patch our OSS. Additionally, alerting on vulnerabilities at pull request time. Still a common problem today is developers will introduce new open source dependencies into a project. They'll submit their pull request, and that new piece of open source that they are introducing already has a known vulnerability in it. And there are tools today, like on GitHub dependency review, that will alert PR reviewers via a comment that says, hey, this newly introduced package has a vulnerability. And now the pull request reviewer can see that, and they can say, hey, I need you to fix this before I can accept this pull request and merge it in, right? So these are all tools and technologies that are helping address this problem of vulnerabilities. And level 2 helps us, for those that need to be producing SBOMs, it's going to also help us produce healthy looking SBOMs because it's going to be improving our OSS hygiene, and allowing us to share these SBOMs that have kind of like the latest and greatest open source plugged in.
Great. It looks like it's my turn now, Adrian, for a little bit, anyways. and feel free to chime in whenever you've got a comment, because I value your opinion as well, and I know you've got lots of depth here. But let's take a look a little bit at some software bill of materials 101, or SBOM 101. And I think it's kind of funny when we were reviewing these slides earlier, Adrian. S2C2F has that circle, and you start at one point, you go around, and you just keep doing this iterative process. Well, at Finite State, I guess our circle is a square or a rectangle, because it's very iterative of this same type of process, where we create or update our software bill of materials, and we get some of the usage info. We do some enhancements to that, refine those enhancements, like something like VEX, BDR, and so forth, comparing those to known CVEs. We then have folks review those findings, send out notices to third parties, look at what our licenses look like. And then we've got that opportunity to remediate some of those findings based on the contents of our software applications. And I think one of the things that Finite State does, maybe a little differently, and that, Adrian, the attackers are shifting left into that development cycle. But as part of that development cycle, many IoT manufacturers and other folks don't always have all of the code written by them. They're dealing with a lot of third-party stuff. And maybe they don't have insight into the components that went into that third-party stuff, or they're not confident that the SBOM that they're being given is accurate. So one of the things that's also helpful is to shift right. Take what's actually being shipped to the customer and decompile, disassemble, and perform binary source code analysis or binary SCA to turn that log into all of its constituent libraries and components and so forth, and run that same enhancement. So now you have an opportunity to maybe work with your suppliers to help them remediate and go back and monitor for changes and so forth. So it's not just about necessarily your first-party code. It's also about the code and the compiled code that you've been provided as part of your solutions as well. I think the biggest thing to gather out of all of that, and thanks, Tom, is that the software bill of materials is that ingredients list that is now required on the back of all of our food packaging. And not only that, not just the ingredients list, it tells you what vitamins are in there, and whether you're getting your daily allowances and what some of your risks are for some of your fats and so forth. So arguably, the software bill of materials is part of a bigger effort, and there's lots of different bill of materials that we can be seeing to help enhance a software bill of materials as well. And when we were originally starting to look at 524B here in the United States for dealing with the FDA for medical devices, their initial language include what was known as a SBOM as part of the submission process for a new medical device. And well, there's some namespace collisions now with SBOM. They had it as a cyber bill of materials. It's also potentially a crypto bill of materials, and crypto meaning cryptography, not cryptocurrency. So yeah, there's folks that get confused about that. But they've largely pulled back from the SBOM as a whole, but they still may later ask for additional bill of materials, such like a hardware bill of materials for a hardware components. And for me as an attacker, knowing what some of that hardware is in a device before I've even purchased it or have integrated it into my solution gives me some ideas about the level of security and some things that I should look for even on the hardware side. So lots of opportunities for us to manage our vulnerabilities and or our issues going through with our supply chain. All right, Tom, next slide. Awesome. So what does an SBOM look like? It looks really pretty here, right? In the finite state platform. Yeah, it doesn't always look like that. Software bill of materials is machine readable data. Yeah, like we're reading the Matrix, and I ironically didn't wear my Matrix shirt today. I probably should have, because that would have flowed well here. But machine readable, it's hard for a human to interpret. So we largely need some tools or some management to be able to make that better here. And arguably, there's going to be two different places where an SBOM is helpful between software producers and software consumers. Okay. So from the producer side, generating SBOMs as part of your development cycle and potentially even doing that shift right for what you're actually delivering to the customer for their software, if there's third-party components involved, can give insight into known security issues, and giving us that ability to go through that circular motion of submit, enhance, review, remediate, recompile, and so forth, and do that in an iterative process to start reducing those over time. But on the consumer side, we're now seeing folks like the U.S. federal government and others demanding a software bill of materials for some of the products being purchased by the U.S. federal government. I'd argue that they and other groups asking for software bill of materials for the software as shipped or the firmware as shipped will help consumers evaluate their security programs, can see how various manufacturers are evolving their security programs over time, and with the enhancements with things like VEX, be able to make better decisions about their security posture. All right, Tom, thank you. All right, so correlating those findings from known CVEs and so forth, CPEs and CWEs, really gives us some better insight into some of those issues and how we can improve our processes. So, from the software producers, very much giving insight into the packages that may be used, in the development effort that have known vulnerabilities. And Adrian, what was the package that you mentioned about if you're pulling something in, you can automatically send that ticket to GitHub?
Oh,
put you on the spot, didn't I?
Geez.
If you think of it, we'll come back to.
Yeah,
it's okay. It's good. But yeah, being able to have that type of integration to say, hey, we're pulling in this software product, you've developed it with these particular libraries that have some known vulnerabilities. Here's the pull request to go back and update that. Like that's amazing to be able to have that as part of that development lifecycle. By being able to correlate issues to the components in the software that you're potentially delivering and or from third party. Okay. On the asset owner side, Tom, can you back up one more time there for me? On the software consumer side, this becomes interesting in that it, again, help us develop some due diligence on knowing the versions of software we're using, whether there are updates and what problems they're solving. All right, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, back to the secure by design by doing that CVE correlation with the various components and or packages being used. And also, if you are a consumer of these and you can see that there is a CVE correlation in some of the software that you are using, firmware and so forth, by knowing what that CVE is tied to a specific package, you can then further refine your security controls in your organization. For example, the example here is for OpenSSL. Maybe you turn off anything that uses OpenSSL if it's not needed. Maybe you restrict access to those segments of the networks from other places where you have potentially affected devices until you can apply patches and so forth. And Adrian, I think you had a comment when we were talking about this earlier about providing some of this data to incident response teams.
Yes. So, software producers are going to be generating the SBOM and sharing the SBOM, and then software consumers need to have some sort of a SBOM management capability, and being able to consume those SBOMs and start doing the vulnerability lookups. And when an incident such as Log4j happens, it usually hits the news and it becomes a headline. And whenever an incident like that happens, incident responders want to be able to answer the question, am I affected and what is affected? And they would probably want to turn to an SBOM management tool and be able to run a query to see, are any of the software in my environment have this version of Log4j? Because that was an incident that happened fairly recently in the software industry where people did not know if they were affected or not, and panic ensued, and it became very difficult for vendors to communicate to all of their customers about whether they were affected or not and what actions they should take. And so SBOMs help answer those sorts of questions and can prepare you for that type of an incident.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. All right. And then finally, thinking about some of the remediation guidance, you've got vulnerabilities in your software now based on the libraries and or components that were used compared to known CVEs, which has a risk score associated with it. And now it gives us the ability to prioritize which fixes should happen first, which ones are potentially being used by known threat actors with additional enhancements to that data, and or some additional type of stuff within the Finite State platform for looking for other configuration issues such as hard-coded credentials. So lots of addition here and lots of ways that we can help improve process.
Yeah, and I'd love to just add on to what you just said, and say that as a user of software, a consumer of software, if you're looking at an SBOM and you see that there's vulnerabilities inside, you kind of want to take action. You want to, but in this sort of a case, you know, the open source is embedded inside the software, and you're reliant upon your supplier to patch their open source and then issue an update down to you, which would include the patched open source in the newer version. So what SBOMs allow you to do is to essentially, you know, manage risk. It allows you to first have insight into your supply chain risk that you've never had before. But now that you have this insight, you can start to look at the vulnerabilities in particular. What if one of those vulnerabilities required local access in order to exploit? Well, then that might cause you to start thinking, well, where is this software deployed in my environment? Is this risk of this CVE mitigated in some way just based on the architecture of my enterprise and where I have this software deployed that would prevent the likelihood of an attacker getting physical access to that software? So,
and Adrian, I'll also add to that, it can also guide you if you don't already have it. Maybe it's time to implement it.
Yes, exactly.
Great. All right. So yes, using SBOMs to take it one step further, doing automation for your testing, including that as part of your pipeline, whether it be shift left or shift right. Giving the ability to manage, consume, and generate those software bill of materials for your consumers, and or evaluate them yourself from as a consumer from your suppliers, especially in large enterprise. Okay. Some of the other ones that I think is absolutely fantastic is with the binary SCA, is testing the actual software that you have in front of you today, whether it's stuff that you've developed and or something that is being provided to you as a consumer. This gives you that holistic picture at the end point for that, and then you can attest to those devices and their security in your networks or being provided to your customers. And ultimately, empowering your customers to know that they are purchasing secure devices because you've done lots of due diligence and can prove it by offering them a software bill of material that is reasonably secure. All right, Adrian, I think we've got a tag team on this one. But is the software bill of materials the silver bullet to all of our security problems, right? It helps. It helps. It helps.
Yes, it definitely helps. No, it's not a silver bullet, unfortunately. I wish there were. However, you know, software transparency is ultimately what SBOMs provide. And you know, transparency is an element of trust. And so oftentimes when we think about, you know, risk management and security, you know, the question of trust comes up. And so this is a step in the right direction toward software transparency as a whole. I think this is maybe the tip of the iceberg, and there might be more coming in the future for the software industry at large. But with SBOMs, you've got improved vulnerability management. You can understand your supply chain risk that you had zero insight into before. And you have this kind of streamlined incident response. So you can answer the question, am I affected? What is affected? And then if you know you're affected, now you can enter a state of heightened watch. You can be on the lookout for an out-of-cycle patch and maybe prepare your teams to deploy the hot patch within your environment when you receive it. Or you might be on the lookout for that VEX statement that says, actually our software is not affected by this particular vulnerability. So those are kind of the things that are coming. I think the the industry is not quite there yet. Like I said, we're been very focused in generation as a whole, and I think now the industry is shifting towards this how to share and how to consume and manage SBOMs at scale.
And Adrian, I think that's part of where some of the limitations come in too, about potential incomplete coverage and that continuous monitoring. Because if you're dependent on potentially hundreds of different packages that each have their own SBOMs that you need to ingest as part of yours, potentially, there's opportunities for mistakes to be made, things to get missed, and maybe even part of that shift right. Thoughts about generating SBOMs. Maybe there's something that's included as part of your development cycle that you weren't aware of, that some other libraries are pulled in at compile time or by a developer that you wanted to use the specific version of this because it's the one that they know how to use and it's not broken or something of the like. But on the not silver bullet part too, the one that kind of terrifies me is that you don't know what you don't know. And an SBOM isn't going to tell you if your software is vulnerable to an unidentified vulnerability, or what now would be a 0-day, or a -1 day, as it might be. It's there, but yet nobody has found it. So it's not going to tell you that. It's likely only going to tell you what we know about. And to the supplier security thing, you're dependent on the software bill of materials potentially from your suppliers to tell you what the problems is and what the problems are, and you may not be able to address or remediate those. I did see a question that had come in about, like, if you're the end consumer and you have a software bill of materials and you've got a vulnerability, well, what do you do? And I think that similar types of things with that supplier security, it's how can you work with either the supplier to get them to remediate it, or how can you provide additional workarounds or additional security controls in your environments and your builds to work around those. All right, Adrian, time for us to wrap up, huh? We're getting really close, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So as software producers, knowing your software is important. Understanding the components that are going in that you're taking a dependency on is very important, and it's also important for the consumer as well. Hence this whole demand for SBOMs and software transparency as a whole. And because of, look at all those open source supply chain threats that we just talked about and how it's increasing year over year at 742% average growth. So, you got to start leveraging existing frameworks that have already, spent large amounts of focused time and have actually been implemented in organizations. Frameworks such as the S2C2F for how to protect developers from consuming malicious open source, as well as how to address known vulnerabilities faster, and allowing you to pivot and scale. And the fact that S2C2F level 2 requirements helps you produce healthier looking SBOMs is only going to make you and your customers feel more comfortable about your software. And then taking proactive measures towards these steps. So, I believe we're going to close out with actions that you can take following up before we get to the Q&A.
Right. Yeah. So to some of those, Adrian, at Finite State, we have our quote own unique approach to some software risk management stuff, in that we offer end-to-end SBOM solutions, arguably both shift left and shift right. And as part of that shift right, we have some of the best-in-class binary SCA or binary analysis for taking those binaries and turning them back to their constituent components as part of that software bill of materials. And taking those very accurate software bill of materials, because we've taken what was actually delivered potentially to the customer or intended to deliver from the customer, with that data, we can effectively compare to various vulnerability sources, vulnerability catalogs, with their risk scores to offer over a comprehensive risk management ability to see what's vulnerable, what potential risk what risk they imply to your organization or to your software packages, and give you some steps to help remediate and or carry those upstream. Next one, Tom.
Absolutely.
All right,
And
Adrian, this one's you.
Yeah. And I want to just kind of reinforce this message that I think there's kind of two camps. There's SBOM producers, those that are producing software, and actions you can take now are, I encourage you all to take a look at the S2C2F requirements, specifically the maturity level 2, because I think that's a great way to get started to make sure that your organization is producing healthy looking SBOMs that your customers are not going to question or anything like that, because it's all about adopting tools and technologies to help you patch faster, which also protects your software from compromise. So many benefits here. But then the other camp is the software consumer camp, and I think the actions that you can start taking there are start thinking about what does your organization need to do to prepare for SBOM management. As we said, the industry at large has been focusing a lot on SBOM generation, but I think we now need to pivot and start getting ready to focus on sharing and consuming SBOMs and using tools to manage those and gain insight into your supply chain risk. I think there's many things that organizations can start considering about, should risk management teams be the ones that own the scope for managing software and getting them prepared for having a new tool in their arsenal to help do so. And what are they going to do, and how do they coordinate with incident responders inside of your organization? Those are all the things that organizations can do to prepare.
Yeah, another one they can start doing to prepare and even enhance some of their practices, Adrian, was you talk about the risk managers and those folks. I think me personally, coming from a very long penetration testing background, having those software bill of materials into your internal security teams who may be doing internal penetration testing, internal vulnerability scanning, is also hugely helpful, so that they can also evaluate those threats through the different medium, whether it's remote code execution and those types of things. That they can go into that testing pre-armed with potentially a whole bunch of things that they can test for to have better opportunities to find more places in the company to help secure them. So I think having an SBOM in your organization across multiple teams is helpful. But again, back to that management. Oh my gosh, we've got all this data. What do I do with it, and who do I give it to? And so, yeah, start thinking about where we can get that to and how we're going to start managing it now.
Yeah. And I think we're on to questions. And since we kind of ended on an S2C2F slide, I do want to address one of the questions in the chat that was how does the S2C2F compare to SALSA? I just want to reemphasize that it complements SALSA. If you look at SALSA version 1.0 today, they have requirements for the build track. But the S2C2F is very focused on how you consume dependencies. So they work together, and you should use both.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. We also have some really good, we have probably about 5 questions around VEX. So let me see if I can combine at least maybe 2 of them here, but maybe we start with, looks like Tom Ulrich had a really interesting question here, around VEX, which is, just get to it. Are there any software suppliers today that are regularly producing VEX for any of their products? Maybe Adrian, we start with you, and then we'll go to Larry.
Sure, I know of two that are doing it today. Red Hat and Cisco. So Vex has its own schema that's separate from SBOMs, and for those that aren't aware, a Vex statement is a separate file from an SBOM, and SBOMs are static. So this will also kind of answer one of the other questions. SBOMs are static and represent a specific version of software, but vulnerabilities may be discovered over time. So vulnerabilities are a temporal problem. So Vex needs to be dynamic, while SBOMs are static and represent the versions of software that are used. And so Vex should be separate from SBOMs. And yes, both Red Hat and Cisco leverage the CSAF schema for reporting their vulnerabilities, and the CSAF schema already has a Vex profile built in. So because they were already leveraging this schema, they were able to start implementing Vex statements in their vulnerability announcements.
And Tom, yeah, of the two that are regularly producing Vex today, Red Hat and Cisco were the two that I was aware of. I'm almost positive that there are a lot of a number of larger software developers that are releasing Vex as part of that. But I can only expect that we're going to see more as more and more organizations have that process improve.
Sure. No, thank you guys. Going back to Adrian, you touched on a maturity level within the framework. I've got a question from Ken, who's wondering if you're seeing that maturity level being applied, like at various companies. Are we seeing that applied at the product level, the product family level, company-wide? And then an example he asked is, for example, is Microsoft at level 4, given sort of like the maturity stage that you've laid out here?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and I would say that it should be at the product level. Every software development team may do things slightly differently. At Microsoft, we're trying to be uniform about how we address all of these problems, so that we kind of standardize on solving these problems at scale across all of our developers. So yeah, I would expect in the future that individual products could say, oh, this is S2C2F level 2 compliant or level 3 compliant. And where is Microsoft in all of this? I didn't talk too much about it, but level 4 is very aspirational. There are some tools and commercial service offerings that help you meet level 4. But it's also very aspirational in nature. And I would say that Microsoft is like at scale, the way that we've configured everything for our developers, we are in the level 3 area. And then we have pockets that are doing things in the level 4 area based on the level of risk and the amount of investment that they want to put in to reduce that risk for those products.
Thanks, Adrian. We probably have time for one more question. We've gotten quite a few here, so we'll try to answer them also through the chat. Maybe we'll hang out for a little while longer afterwards. But
hey, Tom, I've got one that came through the chat that I'd love
sure.
to ask Adrian. Specifically, from Peter. Is there best practices now on how to maintain SBOM information? And I'll add, does S2C2F have any offerings on how that may be done?
On maintaining the SBOM information. Yeah.
So I'll set the stage, I guess, is that I'm the consumer and I'm getting a bunch of SBOMs. Like, how is there any best practice on how I should be maintaining that, distributing that, retrieving that at some regular interval, and adding your expertise or an S2C2F?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, because I think it's at the heart of, like, this is why we need to focus on SBOM management practices today. I don't think these things are being talked about enough, and I have some initial thoughts. There's I would encourage that somebody that's managing SBOMs for software in their environment, that if they roll out an update and they update software from one version to the next, they probably no longer need the SBOM for that old version. But how do you know that that old version is nowhere else in your environment? So there's going to be, I think, some maturity that the software industry needs to do to be able to match SBOMs that are in your consumption tool with, like, software inventory tools, so that you can highly correlate SBOMs to software, so that there's that strong linkage. And yeah, I would encourage that we delete SBOMs that we no longer need, because I think there might be storage volume might quickly grow. And so being able to, delete the unused, unnecessary SBOMs, I think would be a great practice, so that storage just doesn't get insane.
Awesome. Well, we're 3 minutes past the hour, guys. I think I might just turn back to Mike to wrap up.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Some really, really cool stuff. And I certainly learned a lot here. Just want to say thanks, everyone, for attending. And a lot of people had some questions that we didn't get to. But for the team over at Finite State, we'll send you those questions. And hopefully you guys can do some follow-ups. But always nice to see so many great questions. And again, that's the reason we do it live. So hopefully that everyone found this very useful. And again, it will be on demand for your viewing pleasure. But to our panelists and to you, Tom, thank you so much for your time today. I found it very enlightening. And we hope we can do another one of these soon with you guys.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.